We have Stephen Batiuk. I'm very pleased to introduce you Stephen Batiuk from the University of Toronto. He will talk to us about Caucasian cocktails, the early use of alcohol in the cradle of wine. Stephen?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. As a little context, this paper was originally to be in a workshop in the cognitive archaeology session entitled The Ecstatic Experience in the Ancient World, organized by Diana Stein and Sarah Costello. Now, the session was unfortunately canceled, so I was shuffled into this session. So I'd like to begin by thanking Diana and Sarah for originally organizing the session and the subsequent publication that we've been working on. And also thank the organizers of ICAANE and Dr. Pisamente for making room for me in this session at the last minute. Now, the original workshop aimed to address issues relating to the nature of the ecstatic experience, how it was achieved, where, in what circumstances, and by whom, as well as questions concerning its purpose, its expression in literature and art, and its influence on the religion and mythology. And the present paper looks at the role of the different uses of alcohol in the Caucasus from the Neolithic to the early Bronze Age, and the way that mixing of different alcoholic beverages may have had different uses, one more focused on the ecstatic experience itself. And I'm gathering from the questions of the last speaker that Dr. Elena Rova is in the audience, so I am looking forward to hearing her completely disagree with me. So I'm up for some discussion afterwards. Now, it's long been recognized that the utility of food goes beyond simple subsistence, but it's something that is tied to symbolic constructs. The consumption of food can be linked to ethnicity, gender, social status, and also has played an important utilitarian role in the sacred since the earliest of times. Likewise, the multifaceted role of alcohol in both the ecstatic experience and mundane transactions of individuals predates our recorded history. The role of alcoholic beverages in general is a topic that has really only been appreciated in studies of the rise of Near Eastern complex societies over the last 30 plus years or so. But scholars now understand that it can play a similar role to that of food. Most studies of alcohol in ancient societies have focused on its role in health and nutrition, ritualistic functions, and or its role in creating or in reinforcing social identity. Now, the role of alcoholic beverages in human history has changed, obviously, significantly over time and space. However, in relation to the development of complex civilizations, alcoholic beverages regularly played an important role in the development of hierarchically structured societies in the Near East. Specifically, as Dietler notes, alcohol tends to be an important mechanism for reorganizing agricultural production and for intra and inter-societal exchange, labor mobilization and central distribution, and as well as an elite and cultic symbol. Now, in researching the history of alcoholic beverages, one must first acknowledge the contributions of Patrick McGovern, the man I jokingly like to call the godfather of ancient alcohol. No one person has done as much for the scientific study and popularization of the field from a methodological, historical, and social point of view. And as you'll see, much of his research figures prominently in what I'm presenting here today. Now, the study of ancient alcohol is frequently focused on the misleading question of when it was first discovered, something I myself have been guilty of. But fermentation, the production of alcohol from sugar-laden liquids, is a natural process, and it was discovered accidentally a number of times all over the world, and might still have greater antiquity than we presently know. Now, the earliest documented evidence of the intentional production of alcohol in the Near East comes from the Neolithic farming communities of the Caucasus and dates to the beginning of the 6th millennium BC. The extremely high number of grape varietals found in the region, there's slightly over 500 different grape varietals, had long made it a primary candidate for being the cradle of wine, the region where grapes were first domesticated and wine was first produced. Now, vessels from the Neolithic settlements of Stewards, Gora, Garachili Gora, and Kramistili Gora provide evidence of an unadulterated fermented grape wine stored in simple clay vessels, which were probably sealed with a leather cover. Evidence is mounting that early experimentation with alcohol may have extended back to the Epi-Paleolithic period. McGovern briefly discusses evidence for this for the consumption of wine, but it is still tentative. As for the Epi-Paleolithic period, it's a period of experimentation with food production. So it's logical for it to likewise be a period of experimentation with different forms of food processing, of which fermentation could be one aspect. The data from the Neolithic period, on the other hand, appears to show the intentional production with a clear understanding of the process, the intent to produce pure grape wine. This more recent discovery predates the previous example from Haji Firuz Tepe in Iran by about 600 to 1,000 years. However, the two vintages differ technologically. The Haji Firuz example was a resinated wine, while the earlier Georgian examples lacked that all-important stabilizing preservation agent of Pistacia terebinthus tree resin. This small but important differentiation may represent a narrow window in the early development of wine production, before these early farmers had developed the techniques to better preserve their product. Now, traditional approaches to the cultural study of ancient alcohol tends to avoid the discussion of spirits and examines it all in a sort of a binary fashion, beer versus wine, ignoring for the most part mead and spirits due to the late development of the distillation technology, as well as alcohol made from other fruits. Beer and wine production, however, might be related. Beer is well documented from the 4th millennium onward, and it was probably developed not too long after wine, again with the first agricultural societies in the Near East. The skin of the humble grape, though, is one of the few vehicles, aside from figs and dates, for the Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast, the main alcohol-producing yeast. This yeast is also used in bread and beer production, but it naturally occurs on grapes in the correct proportions alongside the proper amounts of sugar. This yeast can therefore quickly convert said sugars into an alcohol at a level that will eliminate the other sort of competing microorganisms that could possibly spoil the beverage. Now, the aforementioned binary approach to the ancient study of alcohol is obviously misleading. Firstly, it ignores alcoholic beverages made from other sources, such as mead made from fermenting honey. Indeed, honey is actually one of the other natural environments for our important yeast. It's found in abundance. This combination of this naturally occurring yeast with high levels of sugar in honey makes it likely that honey was probably an equally ancient source of alcohol. All that would be necessary would be water to dilute it. Honey was, in all probability, one of the first foodstuffs collected by Paleolithic hunter-gatherers. Some of the earliest evidence that we have of humans using honey comes from rock art caves. The best example you see on the right here from Cuevas de la Araña in Valencia, Spain, which depicts an individual suspended on a rope collecting honey in a basket with bees flying around them. Where we have very ample evidence of something similar documented from honey hunters in Nepal that you see on the left. This rock art has been indirectly dated to approximately the 6th millennium, but this was probably a very old practice. Wall paintings from Neolithic site of Çatalhöyük depict what appears to be a honeycomb pattern, and residue evidence of vessels from the site also show evidence of beeswax dating to the 6th millennium. Paleontological data from the renewed excavations at Ara de Visgora in Georgia show that honey was being used in a domestic cooking context dating to about 5500 BCE, implying that honey was being processed and used in a domestic context, although the end product is unknown. Oh, sorry, here is our examples from Çatalhöyük and Şulaberes. Indeed, the evidence for the earliest documented fermented beverage doesn't come from the Near East at all, but comes from Jiahu, China. And it's not honey, mead, beer, or wine, but rather it's a mixed fermented beverage of all of the above, made from a rice beer, honey mead, and fermented grape or hawthorn fruit juices. And therein lies the secondary problem with this whole binary approach to ancient alcohol. In these early periods, straight wine or beer, in all likelihood, was probably a rarity. As beer mash lacks any natural source of the yeast, fermentation of the earliest beers was probably more easily started with the inclusion of some yeast-laden berries. Now, the Greater Near East is a region of significant biodiversity, more so in the past than today. and especially the Caucasus. The Neolithic Revolution led to the domestication of many species of fruit that contained high enough levels of natural sugars to be fermented into alcohol. The highlands of the Caucasus, Zagros, and Taurus Mountains are home to many fruits that were exploited quite early on in history, including apricots, peaches, sweet cherries, pomegranates, any of which might be used to create an alcoholic beverage. The main missing ingredient was the source and sort of understanding of the role of that Saccharomyces cerevisiae yeast. Once this was understood, alcoholic beverages could be made from a variety of fruits or processed starches based on their availability and society's developing tastes. Moreover, until the understanding of the technology, understanding of and the technology for proper storage and preservation of these alcoholic beverages, most especially the understanding how to stop the transformation of an alcohol into a vinegar, they would have been mixed and adulterated over the period of their storage to adjust for any changes in taste that might have occurred from the introduction of bad bacteria or oxygen. And evidence of this mixing can be found all over the Near East and Eastern Mediterranean. Organic residues from containers at the Chalcolithic site of Ara-Ni 1, where the ancient Chalcolithic wine press was found, produced traces of grapes as well as a red pigment derived from pomegranates, which might suggest a blending of these two regional fruits. Further afield, the Levantine wines found in the dynasty Zero-Tomb Uj at Abydos, dated to about 3150, all contain slices of figs suspended on a string within the vessels in order to either add extra flavor or sweetness, or even perhaps as an added source of yeast for further fermentation. Old Babylonian texts from Mari on the Euphrates talk of blending wines and beers into new cocktails. There actually are wine stewards or cup bearers whose job this was. McGovern's work has also shown that late Minoan 1A Crete, so circa 1600, a grog mixture of barley beer, honey mead, I should say, and resinated wine was produced and consumed. This Greek grog was consumed out of mass-produced conical cups that are frequently found in late Minoan 1A, circa 1600, and in particular late Minoan 1A cultic context, in which this grog was consumed. This mixture remarkably parallels the beverage identified in Tumulus MM, otherwise known as the Midas Mound, at the site of Gordian in Turkey, deposited some 900 years later. Different spices were added to suit cultural preferences, but the combination of these three alcoholic beverages, beer, mead, and wine, could result in a more powerful cocktail, as the alcoholic content on any of the three could vary in its own right, and mixing them would only raise the final alcoholic content of the beverage. This combination would appear to have a long tradition in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East. The question is, how far back can we actually push it? Now, one case study that provides some clues to the earlier history of such cocktails comes from the early Bronze Age of the Caucasus, so between 3500 and 2000 BC. The major archaeological culture of the region at the time is known as the Choroxis culture. The Choroxis first appeared in the mid-4th millennium in South Caucasia, modern Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. And by 3000 BC, it's found across most of the Near East, from the Zagros Mountains to the east, north across the Caucasus, west along the Taurus, down as far as the southern Levant. It's known by a variety of different regional names: Karaz culture, red-black burnish ware culture, Girbet-Kerek ware, Yannick ware. The Choroxis represents one of the most widespread and long-lasting, yet least well-known archaeological cultures, really. More than 1,500 settlements have now been identified bearing this material culture in some form. And evidence indicates that it was spread through a population migration and a variety of cross-cultural interactions. At its heart are small egalitarian agricultural villages that are organized at a tribal level. Now, evidence of domesticated grapes have been found at sites, the Choroxis sites of Khizinat-Gorak, Fatskalebi in Georgia, Velikant in Dagestan. There's also been evidence at numerous sites in Armenia, although direct physical evidence of wine production, such as a wine press that we saw at Ara-Ni, has so far not been identified in Choroxis settlements or Choroxis contexts. In spite of this fact, the recent paleontological studies of Choroxis vessels have begun to identify growing evidence for wine and its importance to the cultures of the region, especially in possible ritualistic contexts. Identifying the ritual for the Choroxis is a challenging task. Unlike other contemporary cultures, information pertaining to the cultic activity is difficult to discern. Possible public or communal activity halls, what Mitchell Rothman would describe as feasting halls, have been identified at Godin Tepe, what's known as the Conversation Pit in Iran, Kfatzkalebi, the Red House in Georgia, and possibly Arslan Tepe, Building 36 in Turkey, as well as Shengabit, room M5 in Armenia. No temple structures have been identified in the Choroxis settlements. Rather, ritual activity appears to have been centered on the household, with the hearth as the focus of ritual activity. In the houses within the homeland of the Choroxis, in Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and parts of eastern Anatolia, the central hearth have formed this formulaic shape, a trilobate with this rounded upper lobe and two lower heart-shaped lobes that are indented. These lobes serve as a way to support vessels over the heat source. However, the shape of the hearth bears an almost striking resemblance to a grapevine leaf. In numerous examples, there's indentations between the two lower lobes, in which at least one example from Shengabit, a drinking cup was actually placed. At the site of Pulor Sakyol in eastern Anatolia, a different style of hearth with a human-faced andaran was found, surrounded by a large jar with, again, numerous small cups. The hearth actually had channels carved into it to drain away the blood of any sort of animal sacrifices or wines that were used in libations. Later rebuildings at the site of Shemgabit, that room M5, led to the addition of a perforated platform that may have served for libations as well. Antonio Sagona noted numerous objects with connotations of domestic food production, such as sheep, cattle, arrowheads, are all buried around these hearths at the site of Sosoyuk. The focus of Choroxis ritual then appears to be on the home and the hearth, the center of life in an agricultural society. Fire, or at least heat was an important element, and based on the ceramic repertoire and their context, drinking and feasting are hypothesized to have played an important role. The great leaf shape might suggest that wine or wine-based beverages might have played a prominent role in the drinking aspects of the activities. Palynological evidence, or analysis, the examination of pollens and non-pollen polymorphs is becoming a powerful tool in archaeological research. While it's more frequently used in the reconstruction of ancient environments, it's beginning to be applied more frequently to the analysis of vessels to help determine their context. And it's a more economical proxy to residue analysis. Where residue analysis looks for organic chemical markers, such as lipids or acids that have been absorbed into the porous ceramic vessels, palynology looks for the microscopic materials such as pollen, insect remains, inorganic fragments, etc., that are preserved in the soil. While not a replacement for residue analysis, it can be used as a powerful indicator of what food or drink would have been stored in these vessels. And Eliso Kvadze at the Georgian National Museum has been at the forefront of this analysis for the cultures of the Caucasus in particular. In analyzing the series of Choroxis vessels from the site of Ara de Visgora in Shidakarta region of Georgia, Kvadze has identified ritualistic uses of alcohols and other interesting patterns related to the mixing of alcohols. So the site of Ara de Visgora, excavated by the Georgian-Italian Shidakarta Archaeological Project, led by Dr. Elena Rova, is this large, important site in the Shidakarta region of the Republic of Georgia. In 2015, two zoomorphic vessels were found in a typical wattle and daub Choroxis house in locus 2433, and it had a central hearth. It was destroyed by a fire dated to about 29 to 2880 BCE. The vessels are oval in shape, thick-walled, heavily burnished, with holes at the rear as well as 3 small feet. An elongated neck is preserved on both vessels, which preserves a sort of triangular head that was painted with stylized animal or human features, which were elaborated by plastic decorations. The vessels, although quite similar to each other, are unique to Choroxis' repertoire. And although elements of the figures are seen as incised on the motifs of other Choroxis vessels and andarans, these are still quite odd. The vessels appear to be raita, vessels for the ritual consuming and pouring out of liquids, usually alcoholic beverages. the use of which would fit well within the domestic shrines, such as those at Poloroshengavet, which accommodated those drains. Such vessels are well known from second millennium Anatolian and Cycladic contexts, but as again, I emphasize, were unique for the Choroxis. Soil was taken from these two vessels, analyzed according to the standard methodology for palynological investigations, and the palynological spectra of the vessels identified 16 different tree or shrub and 28 herb taxa, alongside, of course, Vitis vinifera or grape pollen. The non-pollen polymorphs are represented by Dropsilla fruit fly hairs, moth scales, fragments of bird feathers, and freshwater algae. Favadze notes that the pollen spectra are remarkably similar to the spectra of modern wine, as well as those from vessels found in the Choroxis cemetery of Nachichavchevi and amphora from Vani and the royal wine cellars of Treligorevi. Similarly, 3 vessels from graves in the nearby Doglari cemetery produce evidence of grape pollen, which taken together is suggestive of wine being used in these Choroxis contexts. One divergence Favadze suggests is for the Raita from Ara de Visgora, is the identification of freshwater algae, which might indicate that the beverage had been mixed with water. All examples point to the prominent use of wine in ritual contexts. However, the pollen and non-pollen polymorphs plausibly suggest wine in all these vessels, but on closer inspection, the spectra from the Raita from Aradetis suggest a more complex picture. In comparison to other ancient and modern examples, the concentration of grape pollen in the Raita is lower than both the modern and ancient examples. They also preserve a higher concentration of juglan, or walnut, and chicory or dandelion or chicory. The high concentration of high concentration of walnut pollen is dismissed as likely the result of being species that are grown close to vineyards. However, the same concentrations are not visible in the control soil samples from the western section of the excavations, or from any of the other ancient examples. While the dandelion is found in higher concentrations in the control section, Vitis and dandelion is in higher concentrations in the Raita samples, suggesting its presence is not the result of background scatter inclusion. Additionally, the Raita spectra do not match the spectra of the large jar 2414C-5 found in association with the vessels, which was assumed to be the source of the liquid use in the Raita. These differences in the spectra do not occur in any of the other contemporary examples of wine, nor even the modern ones, and so they are unique to the Raita of Ara de Visgora and their context. The importance of the deviations in the pollen spectra might suggest that a different interpretation might be inferred. Perhaps beverages other than wine, more specifically a mix of beverages, were in use in the rituals associated with the Raita. An alcohol can be produced from fermenting dandelion petals and fruits, more commonly known as dandelion wine, which has a long tradition in many cultures. Grapes could serve as the base or primary source of sugar, and most importantly, that source of yeast needed for the fermentation process. Similarly, although not as common, walnut wine can be made through a combination of unripened grape walnuts and wine or grape juice. These two beverages can be incredibly sweet, and the sweetness that might require mitigation by diluting with water, which is what could be evidenced in the non-pollen polymorph spectra. Additionally, when the pollen counts of triticum are combined with a more general Ceralia pollen category, grain pollens are found in higher concentrations than Vitis and could be the sign of a malted beverage made from wheat that is mixed in there. Taken together, the palynological spectrum of the Raita from Ara de Visgora indicate less a pure wine and more a cocktail of beer, dandelion, and or walnut wine, or a combination of both, and perhaps the addition of grape wine, not unlike our Greek and Phrygian grogs identified by McGovern. This reconstruction, of course, needs to be tested with residue analysis to more properly identify the unique ingredients of the Raita. However, if the present interpretation is true, the context is also of interest. The spectra of the Choroxis vessels from Nachichavchevi and Doglari come from funerary contexts, and they appear to represent true wine, suggesting that straight wine might play an important role in funerary rites. while the beverage consumed in the domestic ritual context of Ara de Visgora appears to be a unique cocktail of 2 to 3 alcohols. The question is why? Assuming the linkage between the house and the focus of cultic activity in the Choroxis world, this beverage might represent an important part of the cultic rites. The resultant mixture undoubtedly had a higher alcohol content and therefore could be seen as a psychoactive brew, adding to the ecstatic experience of the rituals being performed in these domestic shrines. This Caucasian cocktail, not unlike later and better documented Minoan or Mycenaean or Phrygian grogs, also known as kekion, appears to have been used as the focal point in ritualistic toasts or libations in ceremonies utilizing vessels and these rita. So in conclusion, alcohol has long had an important place in society beyond subsistence. As one of the most common and readily available man-made or mind-altering substances, it has frequently played an important role in social constructs and in particular ritual. However, the more traditional binary approach to the historical research of alcohol, focusing on beer and wine exclusively, overlooks other categories of alcohols and ones that might have more specific uses. Grogs or cocktails, mixes of multiple forms of alcoholic beverages, appear to have a long and seemingly important use in ritual. Their possibly higher alcoholic content could have had a greater mind-altering capability, which when used for communing with the gods or the divine, would achieve its goal in a more expedient manner. The paleontological data from the Choroxis site suggests that alcohol, in particular wine, played an important role in Choroxis ritual. However, the data from the Rita from Ara de Visgora suggest the differentiation between funerary and cultic rituals, with a more potent mind-altering cocktail being reserved for the ecstatic experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for your interesting presentation. It's now time for question and answer, and we already have some on the public chat. So the first is a comment of Itzhak Paz. He said, I remind our project in which we extracted yeast from vessels 5,000 years old and produced original Egyptian beer. Also Philistine beer from strainer jugs and mead. It is the first time in history the ancient yeasts were extracted, sequenced, and used to produce ancient beverages. It was published in Bio Journal in 2009. And he also wrote immediately after the reference. So this is the first comment. And I will read you the next question, and then I will give you the floor. Okay. So then we have Sabide Maziar that is asking, thanks for this interesting paper. Based on the current evidence, could we say anything about the production process of wine among the Choroxis communities across the ICAANE? If all along the area we see a homogeneous production process in winemaking or different methods?
Well, it's hard to say because, like I said, we don't have any physical evidence of wine production. That is, we don't have any wine presses. But then again, we're so being tied to the concept of really the Greco-Roman world looking for these large presses. Areni one is something that's unique, and we've been trying to find something similar in Georgia and in some of our survey work, and haven't found anything like that. The hope is to find something like that for the Choroxis. But we also have to keep in mind that for thousands of years, even well into the 17th century, people use things like baskets for crushing the grapes and storing and to create the wine itself. So really, the important thing you need is the ceramic vessels. And one of the things that I've been looking at as of late is something called fermentation spalling, where vessels that have held alcohol that's being fermented, it's the liquid basically partially gets absorbed by the clay, and then as the CO2 is formed, it pops off bits of clay, forming this sort of pockmarked surface on the inside of the vessel. And in looking at a whole slew of Choroxi vessels in the Georgian National Museum, you can really see that signature in a lot of the storage jars. So I'm suggesting that might be our evidence for wine production, but well, alcohol production. Could be wine, could be beer, could be something else.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We have another question actually from Chiara Papalardo. Thank you for the interesting paper. Do you have any information also concerning alcohol consumption in the EBA Western Azerbaijan? I am aware the settlement data are very scanty, but I was wondering if it could be an exchange with the presumably transhuman group transiting the area, especially since small globular jars are among the most common pottery finds with kurgans.
Well, we have Choroxis settlements all over Western Azerbaijan as well. We can't really say for sure. Also keep in mind that wine probably was traded in skins more than anything else, if it's going any long distance. Moving large ceramic vessels with wine would be a little difficult, if you will. So again, there's part of our evidence for any sort of wine trade would be lost because it's an organic material. So we can't say for sure.
Great, thank you. Then we have new question. We will go a little bit further in. We will take a few minutes from the coffee break just to let you answer the question if it is okay for you. So we have Priscilla Vitolo. Thank you for the brilliant presentation. In one of the last slides, a site of Choroxis pottery assemblage, you showed also late Bronze Iron Age vessels. Analysis of residual were also made on these later vessels?
In which slide are they?
Priscilla, can you tell us which slide are you talking about? In the meantime, we will go on with the other.
No, I'm pretty sure the answer is no.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, no late Bronze Iron Age vessels.
Yeah.
And then we have Elena Rova. Thank you, Stephen. Very interesting. Certainly, more students are needed to differentiate these different beverages. I do not exclude that the beverage in the zoomorphic vessels could have been a mixture of alcohol beverage. However, we did not suggest that the jar nearby contained vessels, and also the vessels in the graves did not contain wine, but some sort porridge we suggested. There was some wine pollen because Vitis was also cultivated nearby. This is the Elena comments.
Okay, well, all right. So I guess I partially misunderstood some of the stuff that was being said, but okay. So then that does still say that we've got at least a mixture of something that is being used in these raita, and this might actually give us a better explanation of what it is.
Okay, great. Then we have Sarit Pats. Thanks for the interesting and exhaustive presentation, Steve. Happy to see both Quatzkela and TBY mentioned, and not to be partly pooper, got some comments, and here we are. About Choroxis wine, while clearly important in some contexts, we have to be careful, specifically about Quatzkela. I hope I say correctly the name. Among the ample botanical material from the site, there is only one grape peep. Polynological analysis from good clean samples from the site yielded a lot of fascinating stuff, but nothing at all about grapes. Residue analysis is problematic, not to say a real no-go. All the pottery from the site was clean after excavation with acid, not just washed with water, a common practice in the 50s, 60s. About KKW and Tabaliera, I don't like to mention that, but botanical material from KK were related assemblage as very little, almost negligible percentage of grapes, while local population material is much more, as typical to South Levantine assemblage at that time.
Yeah. Well, okay. First of all, in dealing with Tabaliera, this is in the Diaspora Zone. They're strongly interacting with another local culture. We have no idea if what ritual they have, or even a lot of the foodstuffs. Although at least with the grains seem to be using stuff from the that have parallels to the Caucasus. Obviously, we have to take the chances of them copying every single element of ritual and culture from the homeland down to the Caucasus or down to, say, Israel. With a grain of salt. There's probably going to be holes, but again, we haven't done a good job of looking for the evidence of wine. In regards to Patzkala, yes, well, as you noted, there's unfortunately all the vessels were washing acid, so we can't do any residue analysis. I didn't know that any of the paleontological studies have been done on some of the soil, so that I'd actually like to hear a little bit more on. I'm assuming is it Eliso, so I'll have to contact her about that. The evidence right now for there's growing evidence for the wine in Choroxis, but as everybody who jumps on me with this topic, there isn't a lot. So we just have to, again, it's accident of preservation, or maybe it's just not there. Maybe it's certain contexts. I'm perhaps putting way too much stock in this. No, I definitely am putting way too much stock in this. But it's at least something to discuss. That's always what I'm trying to do, is trying to throw out new ideas that keep us talking about the topics.
Okay, thank you very much. The last two questions, then we will be ready for the break. There is Miranda Evans that is asking, thank you for a very interesting talk. I have read that Saccharomyces cerevisiae has actually been isolated on many different plants, not just grapes and fig states. Would this change your interpretation at all regarding potential recipes?
Well, there's lots of different varieties of the yeast in general. So yes, they might have identified it on a lot of different plants or a lot of different fruits. But it seems the one that's found on grapes is naturally that naturally occurs on the grapes is one that's really good for wine production. One of the key things is the way that it can quickly convert the sugars to alcohol to create a level of alcohol that will kill off all of the other competing bacteria. There's something just great about the way the one that's specifically found on grapes creates the environment for the perfect alcoholic beverage. So other fruits and vegetables might actually have the yeast, but it might not be the right one, and might not be in the right concentrations to properly make alcohol. So again, this is something we have to be careful with.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And we have our last question from Murat Türteki. Mm-hmm. Thank you for this interesting paper. Is there any evidence, such as amphora, about the transportation of wine during Choroxis period? Most of the pottery repertoire of Choroxis is storage jars or open forms. Any form special for transportation?
No, nothing is closed. No closed vessels really. Most of the the craters, if you will, have fairly wide open tops, and so the idea is that they probably had some sort of leather cover on them or something like that. And any transportation or even storage would have been done in animal skins. Like if you go to the top right photo on the right hand side, this is an 18th century Caucasian wine merchant. He's wandering around with a wine skin, having a little sip on his travels. And you can go into 18th century Tbilisi wine cellars, and all you see are essentially skins of entire cows that have been filled with wine and are lying on shelves. We really have to, again, stop obsessing over the Greco-Roman way of transporting and storing wine, and think of other ways and more traditional ways. And so this is, we have to look at skins more, essentially.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So this was our last question. There is just a message from Giulio Palumbi. Ciao, Steve. Very stimulator paper, thanks. And for sure, Elena Rova will be in touch with you because she will write a longer message in other chat. So thank you for everything, Stephen, really. And we're ready for our coffee break. Oh, no, yes, we're